So Kate Baily, I was going to say in the glasses, but of course you both have glasses, and Mandy Manners are sobriety and well-being coaches who founded Love Sober to provide support for women who want to thrive in their sobriety. They host the popular Love Sober podcast. They run group coaching programs and courses and host their members community. In September 2020, they published their first book, Love Yourself Sober, and I've got it right here, a self-care guide to alcohol-free living for busy mothers. It provides all the tools, experience, and strategies they learned to get, stay, and love sober to a wider audience. It's a really amazing book, and I was very, very honored to be able to write the foreword for it. So it's for moms because both Mandy's and Kate's drinking became increasingly problematic when they became moms, trying to meet the needs of everyone else and not knowing they had their own. But it's also for anyone who is in a primary caregiving role and has developed a problematic relationship with alcohol. Both Kate and Mandy work individually with clients and also are coach trainers for the Coaching Academy and Addicting Behaviors program. You can find them on Instagram, lovesober.cic, at the Love Sober podcast, at lovesober.com, Love Sober Pod. You can connect with Kate, Kate Baily Coach, or Mandy Manners Coach. So Mandy is joining us from France.
Me?
Yes. And Kate from Southern England. Am I correct?
There you are correct.
Well, I just really do want to say how delighted I am to have you here. It's just, thank you for taking your time. I know it's later in the evening. You've already had a full day. It's going at 6 p.m. where you are, and we're just delighted to have you here. So I'm just going to, without further ado, I'm going to pass it right on over to you. And if you want to fill in any of the, any other bio details or anything like that, please go ahead. And we'll let you go, do your presentation, and then we'll go to Q&A afterwards. Thank you again.
Thanks. Okay, I'm just going to share the PowerPoint. So yeah, thank you so much for having us and for welcoming us into the community to talk about this topic, which is an emerging kind of fascination with us, I guess, through our own experiences, from the experiences of talking to women in our community, and our own sort of experiences as parents, discovering the links between, or the potential links between neurodiversity, ADHD, and addictive behaviours. And so, as Dawn said, we're both kind of certified professional coaches, and we also train coaches in the area of addictive behaviours for the Coaching Academy. So in terms of just our bio, so as Dawn said, we wrote a book, and we were really grateful for Dawn for writing the foreword for the book. And we were really lucky that a lot of people that we admire within the community wrote some great sort of testimonials. And that's really came from an idea that Kate had about wanting to write a book around self-care and around kind of self-leadership and looking at sobriety as a positive choice. I had the idea of the podcast, and so I asked Kate, because I was listening to podcasts in America and I couldn't find one that really sort of fit the British experience, I suppose. And you know, I mean, British people, we have a terrible sense of humour, but it's kind of one of our ways of kind of dismantling things and dealing with our shyness and our kind of insecurities. So I wanted to listen to that, something that was a bit silly, a bit kind of serious, but kind of looking at sobriety through the lens of motherhood. And Kate had the idea of writing the book, so we kind of joined together and then worked out actually that we had loads of similar things, even though we'd never met beforehand. We actually used to live very close to us in a town called Brighton in the UK. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. So as Dawn said, I live in France, so I've been here for the last 15 years, but I'm originally from the west of England, not far from Bristol. And Kate, if you want just to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Mand. Yes, so and I live in the south of England, and I'm Kate. And yeah, Mandy and I met on a sober forum, and it was strange that we actually lived on the next road to each other way back when, but had never met each other. So that is the power of the global sober sphere and online platforms, right? It's just miraculous, really. We always say everything that we've done has been a kind of happy accident. We haven't really planned anything. We've just gone, what should we do now? And then sort of cracked on and done it. And we're just sort of delighted to be here, talking and being in the As She Recovers community tonight. So thanks, Dawn, again. Thanks.
Yeah, and I must just say that if you do listen to our audiobook, then our audiobook is actually the voice of Rose Romain, who is also another She Recovers coach who lives in Paris. And funnily enough, her and I had a childhood connection, even though we'd never met. So there really is something amazing about the She Recovers community that brings people and aligns people with common values and loves and desires in life in just the most sort of spectacularly bizarre but beautiful ways. So this topic, so Kate in a moment will kind of go on to, talk about what neurodiversity means and the different things that might be related to this. ADHD, autism, and there are other things that are related to neurodiversity. We started looking at this topic because when we were looking at our own drinking stories, trauma was part of the story for both of us. Motherhood was part of the story. Mental health was part of the story. But there was also this feeling of being different or feeling othered in some way, which a lot of people within the community talk about. And certainly for me, I was very rebellious at school. I was always getting kicked out of class. I could never sit still. I couldn't concentrate. And, I have no diagnosis of any neurodiversity, but when we started looking into this topic, it started to make sense that perhaps that was part of my story, that perhaps there's something going on a kind of, neuroscientific sense with me. And maybe that's why I didn't feel like I fit. And, Kate, if you want to chip in on where you came at this angle.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I would say that, doing the podcast with Mandy, we've done it for the last couple of years, and really that opportunity to talk through all manner of things every week has really allowed us the opportunity to join dots, really, and to explore topics. It's been this kind of amazing opportunity, really. And so for me, I came at this. Mandy helped me sort of unpick my own mental health journey and make those links between problematic alcohol use and mental health. And then really I came to this as a mum because one of my children identifies as neurodiverse, and we didn't know until things started getting very problematic at school. And so it was really unpicking this and talking, one step at a time, one article at a time, one conversation at a time. And reference a wonderful woman called Kit Messenger, who's an educationist, a bit later on. And she was actually my kid's ex-headmistress, and she left education. She was very disillusioned with it because she found that the education system was not supporting all children in the UK, and that it was getting kind of worse and not in an alignment with her values as an educationist. And one of the things, she sat down and she talked to us about sensory needs, which we will also go on to. She talked to us about a thing called executive function. No idea what that was, and we'll go into that later. And she talked about neurodiversity being a positive, amazing thing, but which can be incredibly difficult for individuals and families because we live in a neurotypical world. And I was thinking, okay, I've got to look that one up, I've got to look that one up, got to look that one up. And really helped me to understand through the lens of kind of sensory processing. What I said, that's really interesting. We get triggered into fight flight, things that I've heard about on the sober community, and because our senses are overwhelmed. And I started piecing together, and I realized that I was a highly sensitive person. I might not reach a clinical threshold for ADHD or autism, for example, and we'll go around a few in a minute, but that we all have sensory needs, and mine were quite significant. So I realized I have a really big scaffold and a really big toolkit to look after my sensory needs, because if it's too loud, I get very anxious. If it's too bright, I can't eat. And all of these things that I just thought were just me and that I was just a bit tricky and a bit difficult, there might be something to this neurodiversity. So it's almost like the gift of my son and the gift of our difficulties and our journey as a family together that's helped me piece together something very helpful for me.
Yeah, and so, you know, amongst our conversations and then amongst, you know, friends within the community, and then when we started sort of training other coaches, we realized that so many people, you know, were entering this space either as mums or carers of children with complex needs, because the complexity and the difficulty of trying to raise a child in a neurotypical environment when that child has extra needs is very challenging for the parent. But also in terms of our own story and our own identity, coming into, you know, difficulties with substance use or any other addictive behavior. And so it's kind of the combination of the two was like, right, there's something to look at here, and we're only really sort of opening this conversation, and you know, we're really excited. We had a conversation like this recently in the UK with Laura Willoughby from Club Soda. We're having this amazing conversation now, so it's really just starting to open this conversation and go, does this make sense to you? Is this ringing any bells to you and your experience? And how can we look at this within the conversation of addictive behaviors, in the conversations of trauma, in the conversations of mental health, and how can we start to build this into these conversations? So I'll pass this back to you.
Yeah, so this idea, so we've mentioned neurotypical and neurodiversity. So neurodiverse, back in the day, I mean, kids were called naughty, and I don't know what it was like in the United States, but certainly in the UK, if you wrote with your left hand, you used to get hit with a ruler. Like, this is quite this generation ago. But more recently, dyslexia was not recognised, and so there's plenty of, you know, people who thought they were stupid, in inverted commas, because they had dyslexia that wasn't known about. So that's part of this kind of neurodiverse sort of profile. That means that you can have significant challenges in certain areas and really big gifts in other areas as well. And so they've started to kind of piece together a few profiles and give these names, you know, they're common enough now and well studied enough for it to become a really a better emerging picture and a bit better understood in theory, not necessarily in practice. So rather than seeing as something wrong with you, okay, so you're not normal, again, air bubbles, neurodiversity, the idea of this is that the range of differences in individual brain function, so our individual brains and what we're capable of and what they might be doing at any given time, are regarded as part of the normal variation of the human population. So it's seen as a normal variant of the human genome rather than something that's wrong with us, rather than a pathology. So neurodiversity is the idea that neurological variations are known and valued, and that is, I want to really underline that, as valued as any other human variation. So this, you know, idea of diversity and celebration and recognizing, yeah, the diverse nature of ourselves. And so on. Sorry, go on.
No, it's okay.
Go on.
No, I was just going to say what's so beautiful about this is that, you know, it has a strength next to every single one of them, which is why we love this slide so much. So, you know, it's really looking at those strengths, and you see that more and more, that people that have, you know, hyper focus can be incredibly successful business wise, but it's about getting the toolkit in place to kind of look after those diverse nature of the brain.
Yeah, and if you go around, so you can see there's a few dyscalculia. So someone might say, oh right, they're dyslexic, right? So i.e. you can't read properly. It would have been the old thing. And now you've got, under dyslexia, you will be likely to have real strengths in visual thinking, creativity, and 3D mechanical skills. As Mandy said, with ADHD, we've seen them as naughty boys who can't concentrate. That's the stereotype. However, you have like these periods of incredible hyper focus, energy, passion, entrepreneurial spirit, and bravery. You know, you have a lot going on. But so many, you know, if the school system has not recognized this, we get into these negative narratives and negative consequences, which mean people have been marginalized and, you know, basically discriminated against. So again, I was just going to go around and a few more sort of Tourette's that you might know about. Autistic, ASD is autistic spectrum. Then we've got dyspraxia, dyslexia that we know. The underneath as well, we've put here HSP, introvert, extrovert, with a question mark, because you might be thinking, well, I don't have a diagnosis, or my son, daughter doesn't have a diagnosis. And one thing that we see increasingly aware of, and in our own lives as well, is that you might not hit a clinical threshold. It kind of doesn't matter, in that if you have presenting symptoms, or you have a presenting, what could I say? Yeah, a presentation of it. And if you are struggling in certain areas and you identify, you can apply the tools as well. I mean, in some cases, yes, we're looking at medically assisted kind of treatment, but not necessarily. And I have been sat down by mental health professionals and said, okay, you have not hit a diagnosis for this with your son. It doesn't matter. Let's see what's going on and how we can support. And that's the kind of ways in which it's being kind of dealt with.
So yeah, in terms of executive function, I mean, this is the area which is very interesting in the area of behaviour. And Kate, I mean, you know this much better than I do. So if you could explain the executive functions for people.
Yeah, well, interestingly, so Gabor Mate talks about ADHD and connections with addiction and addictive behaviours quite a lot, and he would be focusing partly on the nervous system but partly on the brain. And there's another man called, if you are recognizing any of this, or you're interested for you or your kids or someone you know, called Dr. Russell Barkley, who explains executive function really well. So this is this bit of the brain, and if anyone's done any of the kind of recovery coach training, you'll know that this bit at the front, the prefrontal cortex, is the human. It's the bit that makes the good decisions, that can play things forward. It's responsible for, let me clasp on my forehead, impulse control, generating options, flexible. It's the last bit of our brain, it's the higher brain that developed last. And when we're triggered and in addiction, we're often coming from the back brain. So a lot of the work we do in recovery, repairing our brain and repairing the neural pathways, and it is to give our frontal cortex chance to come online and just kind of rewire and recover. And it's very similar in terms of some of the ADHD traits, which, you know, it's this, again, sort of stop, engaging. You've got there your memory. So what you do is you engage your visual memory. That means you think, how did this go last time? When you're about to do something spectacularly dangerous or silly, I'm just talking. So stop, how did it go last time? And then you go, okay, how's it going to play out in the future? That's visual memory as well. And then at that point, you've stopped, you've kind of halted, and then you are going to, they call it entering the playground of the mind, where you're going to start generating options. Okay, that didn't go so well. So actually, instead of, well, for us, maybe it might be taking that drink, we're going to go and have a bath. I'm going to play it forward. I'm going to go for a walk. It's like flexible thinking about all of the resources I can go to. So again, with someone who is struggling with anxiety or with that kind of survival stress, and maybe they've had a really bad day at school and they're triggered, right? This stuff is going offline, you know, the frontal cortex, just in the same way as we do if we are struggling with that and then going towards our addictive behaviors. So what's happening in the brain looks quite similar. And when I started to learn about this, I was just like, wow, that's really similar. This is what people are talking about in sober forums. This is hold, this is play it forward, this is all executive function. So no wonder why there were such big links between, especially teenagers, when that part of the brain is all over the place as well. And choosing to, there's a big statistic, I can't remember exactly it is, but it's a whopping great stat that says if you have ADHD as a teen and you are not medically assisted and therapeutically assisted, you have a massive likelihood of developing and using substances in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, and you know, part of it is the brain side. Oh, so here's us looking fabulous. Oh, if only we were doing this now.
We're not activated. We're not in survival stress in that picture, are we?
No. But you know, part of the beauty, like everything has light and shade, right? That's what we know. And I called myself what did I say the other day? Like, I'm deliciously weird, which is a really great place to be in my recovery, when I can see myself like that. But sometimes I do things and I'm just like, wow, you know, where did that come? But I love it now. So yeah, within these individuals there is that kind of unique strengths, but things can be quite difficult for them, and they can be incredibly talented, but at the same time struggle with really simplistic things. And I think something that we've learned, you know, both being now sober parents and looking at our children through the lens of kind of neurodiversity, obviously Kate with a child with complex needs and a diagnosis, and me looking more at the surface, is, you know, understanding what works for us in recovery and as sober people, and how that can help them too. So, you know, what do you need? Do you want a weighted blanket, or do you want to take all your clothes off? You know, what is it about that jumper that is sending you absolutely crazy? You know, why don't you want to put your coat on? Is it because you're just, you know, being difficult with me, or is it because there's a label that is absolutely driving you nuts? You know, so I'm sorry, that's really badly a really bad turn of phrase. I do apologize. But one of the things, not only have you got the trauma, the side of the brain, but also the kind of the trauma side of it being very impactful, and that's what we touched on at the beginning. Because if you're not being listened to, or you're not being understood, you know, day in, day out, within the school system, within, you know, the workplace, and also the sort of the stress of the world we live in now, which is incredibly high impact, incredibly fast paced. All of this is, you know, traumatic to the nervous system and traumatic for the body, and creates feelings of, you know, of shame, of not being good enough, or of not belonging, because again, we live in a society that is neurotypical, and doesn't, you know, celebrate these diversities within people at the moment. So, you know, as it's written down here, you know, it's the kind of, you know, it's starting on a nervous system level, that, you know, the nervous system is activated. Kate's going to go into more detail about that in a moment. You know, that's traumatic. And then you've got the, you know, perhaps you're not coping in the ways that are expected of you within your age bracket, or within you know, the society that you live. And then you've got the kind of the shame, the othering, and all those other experiences. And so that's quite a toxic mix for someone who and then having low impulse control, that is then supposed to you know, cope with their emotions, right? So that is why the potential for addictive behaviors increase. You know, and studies have been shown in, you know, within the prison system, there's high levels of ADHD and neurodiversity within people that have, you know, for whatever reason, not had their needs met as young people, and neurodiversity is very much a part of that, you know. And as we said, that kind of naughty boy in school, and actually in women, it's very rarely diagnosed in girls, because it presents in a much more subtle way normally.
Often as anxiety and internalized. So yeah, which led me to think maybe some of my my chronic anxiety as a teenager and obsessive compulsive disorder was this undiagnosed, you know, partly this neurodiverse aspect. So it's, yeah, what can we do about it? I mean, I think just neuroscience, having access as kind of people to the, you know, the online world and how much we can learn is just such a gift, because, you know, with it, there's been so many leaps and bounds in terms of neuroscience and neuroplasticity, understanding the autonomic nervous system. And this is such good news for us. It's good news for us in recovery, and it's really good news for people who identify as neurodiverse. This is a bit of a kind of
crash course,
you know, like, yeah. So don't worry too much. Like what we're quite interested in, just a brief description of the autonomic nervous system. The blue dots sort of going down the middle are the sympathetic nervous system, and those are all the things they govern our essential organs and kind of almost like the emergency system, and they also govern fight flight, you know, the fight flight freeze response. So if we are activated, if we are in survival stress mode or stuck in some old survival stress mode, and again, it could be, you know, that the sort of trauma as we know it could be the adverse childhood experience that fight flight freeze survival response has got stuck on. Could be early developmental trauma, which is again where we're looking at some of the neurodiverse profiles. They think that might have something to do, and there's some certain sort of developmental issues there. And then you've got the pink ones. You've got pink at the top, and you should also have pink at the bottom as well. And that's the parasympathetic nervous system. So that is the one at the top is ventral vagal, which is where we really kind of want to be when we're open and engaged and happy and chatting, understanding each other, picking up our signals from each other. You know, if you do a facial twitch, I know what that means, I can read you, etc. And then down the bottom, you've got the ability to sort of go, okay, down regulate, put it simplistically. You can go into freeze, which is another trauma kind of survival stress response. But if it's a high tone, I think it's high tone dorsal vagal, got me now, I'll have to read my notes. That's that kind of rest digest. And what we really want is there to be a kind of wave and to be an appropriate response. We need it all, and we need it all to be coming online at the right time. And so what often happens, again, say you've got, you know, a sensory processing thing, you might have it on the autism spectrum, then you are not going to be, you're going to be much more likely to be activated into that sort of fight flight and be very, very stressed out, basically. You're not going to be happy bunny. So we've got at the top here, we've got we want to be trying to keep ourselves and help our kids be within our window of tolerance. And that's that kind of, okay, something's happened, but it's all right. We know we've got the toolkit on board. So if it is a little bit stressful, that's fine. We can bring ourselves back down again. So we're sort of on this nice curve. We're trying to not get into that hyper arousal when basically everything's gone to pot and we're all yelling at each other. No one's thinking straight. It's a kind of crisis moment, or, you know, the typical one of those would be a toddler in the supermarket having a complete meltdown, and we need to help them. They can't regulate yet, so we need to kind of down regulate them and help them regulate.
Yeah, and you know, part of this, which has been really useful for us, and you know, working with clients and working with ourselves and with our kids, is to sort of understand the relationship between, you know, your stress response and your nervous system and your emotional state, and how can we tap into that, and how can we work with that. You know, and I mean, women often sort of starting off in their sobriety journey, you know, they'll say, gosh, you know, it's all about stress or about anger, or, you know, I'm triggered when I'm angry, and then they kind of deal with that one, but then they go, oh, but you know, there's a dinner party, and you know, it's a happy occasion. So there's those kind of triggers on what seemingly opposite sides, but actually they're both sort of states of high arousal. So, you know, that substance use or that, you know, addictive behavior, whatever it might be, is a mechanism to bring down, you know, themselves out of high arousal and to regulate. And again, it could be something that when it's in the system, when it's low arousal, you know, and it's low, and it's kind of those feelings like that, it might be a way of pulling themselves up. And so there's lots of things to do, you know, here in terms of nutrition, in terms of activities, you know, what is it you need, asking that brilliant question, and really understanding that perhaps, you know, if when you're stressed out, if going for a run helps you, then that's probably going to help you when you're overexcited as well, because you're going to be closing that stress cycle, because you'll be getting the adrenaline out. And again, if it's those kind of low arousal things, perhaps it's, you know, a blanket, it's spending time with your pet, you know, it's doing some yin yoga or something where you feel connected with people. And again, that's going to help you to feel comforted. So that piece, and being able to work with that, and also just sort of, you know, get articulate with your emotions and understand that, you know, when you're excited, that's also part of feeling creative or enthusiastic, you know, or relaxed. There's thoughtfulness there, there's calm. If you can start to develop a kind of vocabulary around your emotions, then that's going to really help you to manage your kind of triggers and what's going on for you when you're feeling activated or inactive, essentially. I use music a lot, so I can switch my mood essentially, and even sit with a mood. So if I know that I want to sit in that space for a little bit, I'll listen to music that I sit in that space. But when I'm done, I know, and then I'll put on some disco or, you know, something like that, and that will bring me back up again. So it's amazing what you learn.
Yeah, so really, I mean, this is a really, really, really big topic, isn't it, in a very, very short space of time. But the nuts and bolts of it are, you know, what's going on in the brain. And the bit, I suppose my favorite bit is this sensory needs bit, because I just feel like it's really practical, like there are real things that we can do. And we have signposted there a Blurt Foundation. It's a UK charity, and it's got lots of free downloads, PDFs on it. And they've got a fabulous sensory toolkit, which goes through the senses, and it looks at your arousal level, and then it gives you tips for and spaces to write all the things that you might do to either bring yourself up a little level if you're feeling like, oof, or bring yourself down a little level if you are feeling like, ah. So it's a really good way of just kind of getting, as Mandy said, sort of almost like this articulate, and getting the language of really that sort of brain body connection that we, yeah, sort of recovery sobriety, we always say it sort of gave us like this almost like a level ground to be able to hear some of that. And that actually goes back to the book. There's a lot about that kind of getting curious, asking questions, being very curious about what it is like in our bodies and in our minds to live in this world as us, and then creating our bespoke toolkit to really be able to apply whatever we need and get, you know, really badass and skillful. So obviously boundaries is a whole other, like being able to use that executive function and go, I don't know right now, I just need to stop, and I actually don't know, and I need a moment to sort of soothe myself is really, really important. Radical self-care in terms of giving ourselves a break. I mean, for us as carers, most of my work is rather than trying to bring myself up, is to bring myself down and try and deal with the kind of stress and the kind of crises that go off and other people's needs. I always said, like, being a mom is like being the emergency services. It's like the rapid response units or whatever. And I didn't realize that I was having a particular experience in that, a heightened experience in that, because of the extra needs. So that's really helped me to go, oh, okay, that, you know, I can have a bit of self-compassion about that. I know that our bedtimes, really, I have to really work at my sleep. I know that we have to keep things sort of calm. We need to not have, so for example, normal parenting might look like your child comes in and says, can I have a biscuit for dinner? And you go, no, you can't, I'm just about to serve dinner. Okay, if you've got a neurodiverse child, you're not going to do that. You're going to go, because you can't afford a hypoglycemic kind of episode and an activation, because the child will then become anxious because they need a bit of sugar. So it's like you almost, I found that it was, and I might then go into this narrative of like, oh God, I have no boundaries, I'm a really bad mom because I'm just letting them have that because of that, and I've not said no. And on and on and on it goes. And I was definitely in that for a few years. Now it's like, oh, okay, I have needs, they have needs, we have extra needs, and we work with our needs, and the rest of the world can do one, you know?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we're not going to be able to get through all the material on this. This is really an opening of a conversation, but you know, the good news, the great news is we are the first generation that has access to this information about how we can soothe and self-soothe our nervous system on a regular basis. You know, we know about neuroscience and we know about neuroplasticity, so none of this is unchangeable, right? So, you know, the more you do something, the more you change habits, the more that things become automatically easier they become. And that's the great thing. So when you can start, you know, making sure you take 6 breaks a day to regulate your nervous system and bring it down, you're not going to do this escalating thing. Whereas, you know, you get to the end of the day and then everything becomes overwhelming. You know, you can be out and be social, but you know, the next day you need to really rest and really regulate your system. And also, you know, it's that kind of thing about self-compassion, right? So this isn't right, okay, I have this thing, so that's why I do something. It's like, oh, I have this thing, so, you know, that's part of me. How can I work with me in a way that is going to be self-supportive and to be healing and helpful to me? So a lot of that kind of shame and feelings that we feel like, oh, I can't do this like other people, why can't I manage my behavior like this? And it's like, because you are your own unique self. So, you know, all the self-compassion, all the self-compassion, you know, practices that you can do. So, you know, and we talk, and this is why it's so interesting, because yet again, you know, this slide could have come from a conversation about recovery as much as it could come from a conversation around, you know, dealing with extra needs within a family. So it's about, you know, true connection. It's about, you know, your resilience and well-being. It's about, you know, co-regulating with other people, borrowing, you know, their nervous system, right? So that's why, like, practice like yoga can be so helpful, because you are within a room with other people that are breathing, and you're breathing with them, so you're borrowing from their nervous system. And again, this kind
regulating.
Yeah, again, this kind of, you know, acceptance, and, you know, sort of just being really curious about what's in your environment. And we're going to just finish with a couple of sort of different tools that you can use, and all of those are mindful based, because essentially when you can bring yourself back to the present moment, again, it's very similar to trauma work. So, you know, grounding, centering, orienting, any of those practices that bring you back into the present moment and make you feel like you are connected with the world are going to bring your nervous system down, and you're going to come out of that hyper arousal, which is generally when people will, their impulse control will be less effective, as it were. So I think we should just run through these quickly so we can get to some questions.
Yeah.
So some of the sort of ones, these are also polyvagal toning, is essentially toning the nervous system. So being able to bring yourself up, bring yourself down, bring yourself to level out. And so the more that you do these practice, the better your system is. When it has something impactful happening to it, it's like, okay, I can manage this because I have resilience within my nervous system. So 874 breath, nature, walks, rocking chair, I love that. Yoga, all of these things are really good to help calm the nervous system. Happy spots in the home. So, you know, literally sort of going around, like, where is it that your energy changes within your home? So is there a spot? I mean, I watch my cat and I follow her essentially. So is there a spot in the house where you just go,
there might be a place where the sunshine just comes through the window and hits the chair, and just that spot, and you get that, they call it glimmers, you just get that moment of, like, it could be a or it could be a little bit of a frisson.
Oh la la. Yeah. So any of those, you know, those moments of awe. So if you have a religious or spiritual practice, perhaps it's connected to that. If you, I mean, personally for me, it comes a lot from, you know, wide open spaces, or, you know, being in the mountains, things like that. So all of these things are going to help you to regulate your nervous system.
What I love about all of that as well is that the idea of all of this, and so much of you know, things like the science of happiness, of positive psychology that we're looking at these days, the Polyvagal Theory, it comes from this open sort of stance that we, about common humanity, and self-compassion comes from that. It's those moments where we connect, when those moments where we see each other in each other. That common humanity is very healing on the nervous system. It's very healing on the brain. So it's very, very good work for us in recovery. It's part of us, our healing as, you know, human beings, you know. So yeah, the ventral vagal, we've gone through that, haven't we? So these are quite nice plans. Personal connection plan. Keep a note, you know, we talked about the sensory toolkit. So, you know, I've got fluffy blankets. Mandy uses music a lot. I have to have nice lights, low lighting, get out fresh air in the morning. If I open my door and the sound of the birdsong hits me, you know, I go, and you can start consciously choosing them so they can be part of your recovery toolkit, your sober toolkit, whatever, you know, words you use. So yeah, build them up, and that's,
yeah,
if you're
again, it's the thing of, you know, within, you know, if you are in a caring role, it's caring for the carer, right? So it's making sure that you have time out, it's making sure that you have time to look after your own nervous system, and also that is going to help them. It might be, you know, if there's issues with noise, you know, it could be, I have headphones that are noise quietening headphones, and sometimes, you know, I sit when I'm watching TV with the kids and they're watching kind of anime cartoons. I find that incredibly stressful, and so I just put my headphones on. They still get a cuddle, but I don't have that sort of that stress. So it's really just getting really skillful at looking at what works for you. You know, dyslexia or anything to do with your learning preferences, you know, learning and respecting that. You know, I mean, again, for me, if I'm reading a sort of worky book, as I like to call it, you know, I'll listen on audio, but I'll read it at the same time, and I'll underline, you know, and so that's me working with me, not against me. And it's a beautiful way to sort of empower yourself, really, and to empower your kids. So I think we'll leave it there. If you've got any questions, yeah, let us know. Or
Thank you. That was wonderful. And everybody was very engaged. And so we do have some questions. We have about 12 minutes. So that was really great. A lot of information, great information. Somebody's asking just for you to confirm that you both identify as neurodiverse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we just thought we'd start with the easy one. Thank you both. That was really informative and some great resources. I think there's just for everybody who's watching, if you're in the webinar, know that you can access this presentation at any time if you go to our Facebook public page, click on videos, and all of our Mental Health Mondays show up there. Our plan was to have all of our Mental Health Mondays edited and put on our YouTube channel, but that's a pretty big job, and we just simply do not have the financial resources at the moment to have that done. So while we're at it, if you find these sessions really informative and you want to make a donation, you can do so on our website. So let's go to the Q&A. Let me see. So somebody is sharing, I'm 47, diagnosed with a form of dyslexia as a child, 20 when diagnosed with ADD. My mother was my biggest advocate, but with that said, the addiction component is definitely there. I just never knew the connections of ADD and BED. It's something my niece, and I'm not sure which BED is, if it's binge eating disorder or something else. It's something my niece recently shared. What's your best advice for someone who struggles with this? Is BED another acronym, something that you were talking about?
I don't know.
Not that I know of. Perhaps they could let us know in the notes. Yeah, I mean, it's all the sort of researching and looking into polyvagal theory and looking into this nervous system regulation and what might be this kind of triggers, the sensory triggers that are impacting and making life really stressful for you or for your niece. And you know, there's so much out there, and once you've got a few kind of tools in your toolkit and know what are the difficult things, you know, it might be, you know, you do online shopping, you don't go to the store, you know, or just those simple things. And it's not about huge changes, it's about just like peppering through your life, small you know, incremental changes and small little things that can just help you to rest and restore. You know, if that can be a mantra at all for anyone, it's just that rest and restore, kind of coming back to
yeah. And with your niece, I think that the diagnoses are useful in terms of accessing certain support. In the UK, I don't know what it's like where you are, what it's like for you over there. In the UK, it's really difficult to get diagnosis through our healthcare system. And I would definitely say that they should be on board with, you know, with the neurodiversity in a positive sense, but obviously that would be good to look at. And someone who can have joined up conversations again with the whole, you know, not okay, there's that route, and then there might be, you know, they call them comorbidities or coexisting presentations. And other than that, not knowing your healthcare system, I couldn't really, you know, give any more advice than that, I'm afraid.
That's good. Thank you. Next question is, does this mean that as a person with ADHD that I may reach for substances to help down-regulate myself? What tools can I use instead?
Yeah, it could potentially be part of the story, right? You know, it certainly was for me, you know, and it's, again, if you look into the neurotransmitters, it's the lack of GABA, that lack of kind of the ability to so anything that you know, gives that feeling for you where you just feel like you can, you know, this, I mean, the state of flow is a really interesting thing to look in. So I know both Dawn and I do puzzles, you know, and the state of flow is when you're doing something that's difficult enough so you have to concentrate, but it's not so difficult that you really have to use your brain. It's kind of the thing you lose time doing. So it could be doing racket sports, or it could be doing a puzzle. And those are things that are really great for GABA. Those are things that are really great for that kind of bringing it down.
Yeah, I find puzzling too, it really kind of gives you that little dopamine hit when you find that one. You're so excited, right? So I'm such a huge advocate for puzzling for everyone.
Again, it's this kind of holistic toolkit, isn't it? And what works for you. So being really curious about what down regulates. Is it a bath? And going on this curious kind of journey, thinking about the resources that you already have and using those. But again, it's, you know, it could be if you've got a diagnosis and you have medication as well, that sort of very holistic toolkit, I think seems to be the, you know, the most successful, really, and give you the most agency.
Yeah. And of course, you know, one of our intentions, guiding principles for She Recovers, is that we be supported to find and follow individualized pathways and patchwork. So it's all part of that, right? I mean, I know some people for puzzles, like the worst thing on earth you could sit them in front of, right?
Yeah.
I remember my sister once, I was trying to get her to meditate. So I was giving her these beautiful nature meditations to listen to, and it was just music and, you know, nature and birds. And, you know, after the first time, she took off her headset, and I just remember saying, I just want to kill those freaking birds. So I was like, okay, so maybe not, this is not your thing, right?
Not your thing.
Yeah, and there is something in there about meditation. I'm doing some training with Irene Lyon at the moment. She's Canadian, amazing practitioner who studied with Stephen Porges and Kathy Kane, and they were saying, you know, things, if you're very interested, look her up on YouTube. Basically, there is a thing called neurosequencing where it can be really uncomfortable and it can be traumatizing to suddenly go and do meditation, do some Kundalini yoga. You know, they're good at some point, maybe, if that's your jam, but in the right sequence. So go, you know, gentle, really gentle, and keep checking in.
So we do have a couple of questions that are more sobriety related than neurodiversity related, but because we've got both of you here, I'm going to ask. So this is somebody who's saying, people are my trigger, not that they're pressuring me to use, but it's just the friends that I've used with, but people I care about still use. But having to completely cut out my friends out of my sober life is really hard. What would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly was a big thing for me. I mean, I live, well, two things, like British culture is very alcohol, you know, heavy. So a lot of my friends, I don't see very much anymore. And also living in France, I live like in wine country, so it's very around alcohol as well. But I think it's finding hobbies that you love, communities you love, and building other sort of spaces. You know, I have the best, most deep, interesting, wonderful friendships with people that I've met, you know, around the world, a lot of them through She Recovers. You know, I flew to LA on my own from France and met people, you know, beautiful, wonderful, sober sisters that I'd never met in real life, but we'd connected over Instagram, you know, and so there are people that will see you and love you in a way. And even if you are within those social environments, just knowing that they're in your pocket and knowing that you've got that support can help you to kind of just sort of manage those social situations, I would say.
Yeah. Awesome.
And embrace the FOMO at the beginning. I don't know how long, you know, you've been in recovery for, but I know for a good while I just gave myself permission not to go out and do stuff. And we always say you got into Downton Abbey, get into Netflix and box sets.
Yeah.
And gradually building up, and slowly find out what you enjoy and who you connect with authentically, and get, you know, support from the sober communities and build those connections. And I always think of it a bit like plate tectonics. that quite a lot of it sorts itself out underneath the surface, you know, if we're just doing the next right thing. Yeah.
Right. And similarly, somebody else is sharing that she has alcohol addiction and ADD. She can't seem to deal with her emotions at times, and so she drinks. And I think, you know, but you've basically been saying the same things. This is probably quite natural and related, and it really is about finding the resources that will support you. I do want to mention that we do have daily meetings. For those of you who aren't familiar, we have daily sharing circles. So normally in this time slot, and then later in the day at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern in North America. Sorry, what is it in the UK? So it's
it will be late. We'll be in the middle of the night.
So the morning, the morning meeting. So at 6 p.m. in the UK, you can join us for our North American early meeting.
Yeah.
And all of our gatherings are hosted by She Recovers coaches like Mandy and Kate. So if you don't know much about those, there's been some links provided both in the webinar and on Facebook, and you can find us and our schedule and join us there. It's via Zoom.
Yeah, and it's kind of like it's closing those stress cycles. So I think, you know, we get to a point where we understand we have stressors in our life, you know, so it's like, okay, I'm going to quit that job, I'm not going to see that person anymore, but actually we haven't dealt with the underlying stress that's still in our system. So things like going to a meeting and sharing, or, you know, doing work in your journal, or going for a walk, or any of those things, you know, then you're actually getting the stress out. So that's the thing I think people forget, right? So we get rid of the stressors, but actually we haven't rid ourselves of the stress.
Correct.
And you were saying about the ADD, I mean, there's one sort of school of thought, you know, that the nervous system work that we were talking about the regulating and doing practices to help regulate and soothe our nervous systems is one aspect. I have a friend who has ADD, and she just said, look, medication changed her life. So, you know, it's one of those things, isn't it, that you find the things that work for you. And you've said, what does ACE stand for? So ACE would be an adverse childhood experience, you know, divorce.
Yeah, and you can find, if you Google adverse childhood experiences, you'll see that it's based on a major study that has really helped the world understand more about trauma. And an adverse childhood experience, there's questions, and you get scored on how many ACEs you had. And sometimes that's often a predictor of illness, including mental illness. And adverse childhood experiences aren't just like traumas, like some, you know, like you were in a terrible car accident. A parent's divorce is an adverse childhood experience. If one of your parents or a sibling was really ill in your family, that's considered related to childhood trauma. So it's just an excellent study, an excellent way to understand how many of us end up where we do. So somebody's asking, what was the neurosequencing teacher's name again?
Irene Lyon, Lyon, Canadian.
Thank you.
A genius.
Somebody else shared
free videos on YouTube. Google her. Go into YouTube. She's got loads of
What's
stuff.
her first name again? Irene Lyon. Wonderful. Somebody else shared a rather lengthy post, and I don't have time to read it all, but she's basically making the point that she believes, and I don't think you disagree with this, that there's the neurodiverse community that identifies as neurodiverse, and then with or without diagnosis, and then there are those with specific diagnoses, and that she believes that seeking diagnosis or having a diagnosis is really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, it can be, I think it's with anything, isn't it? It's like there's reassurance in having that confirmation from someone, and then, as Kate said, then you can access support. So if anyone has in sort of this ringing some bells, definitely go and see your doctor, try and look into this deeper, because then it changes how you can access support in the future. For me, it's like, okay, this is part of my story, but I've got enough. We're all recovering from something. There's a fair few things before I get to that, but perhaps at one point, and again, when we look at sort of addiction, we've moved away from a black and white binary model. You know, we now understand that it's a spectrum of addiction, you know, it's a gradient scale.
Yeah.
And I do think it's the same, that we'll be looking into this, where it's like, okay, you might not be, you know, again, I mean, autism, Kate would say, it has sort of different nuances to it already.
Yeah, and it's how much is impacting on your life or your child's life, isn't it? And
Yeah.
and I think that's when we often seek the diagnoses. It's you know, and I think you're absolutely right, you know, to do that digging and to ask the questions and get the adequate, correct support. 100%.
Okay, so I'm going to answer one question here. Is someone's asking, is it possible to get the slides? Well, actually, what you can do is access this presentation at any time on our Facebook page, because it will stay on our public Facebook page. You just have to go there and click on it, click on videos, and you'll find it. We don't generally ask our presenters to make their slide decks available. Take two questions and then we have to wrap it up. Is it possible to cope with ADHD without medication?
That's like, how long is a piece of string, really? That's a very strange English turn of phrase, isn't it? Sorry about that, people. Again, it would just depend on your kind of presentation and how much of an impact it's having in your life, really. Yeah. Many people do, but really, you know, it would. We're not doctors, so you would have to, you know, do your own research and get, you know, follow your own needs with that.
All right. Okay, I'm going to answer one more and then give you the last one. So somebody's asked, somebody has been researching the brain and found some research related to dyslexia and child abuse. Have you heard of anything similar?
No, but there is definite, you know, with this thing about ADHD and stuff, a lot of somatic practitioners may say that it's where does sort of trauma end, and these kind of presentations can look really, really similar in terms of their dysregulation and how they present, which is why, you know, you have, when you go and talk to a psychiatrist for ages to try and get the right diagnosis, because they have similarly presenting presentations. So that's all I would know about that.
It's so interesting, you know, I feel like I have to say this, but I think that one of the things that I have become aware of in our community as well is that women who may have been diagnosed ADHD as adults and then are prescribed medication have sometimes become addicted to and misusing the medication, which is unfortunate, right? But I mean, if we have the addictive gene, we're going to misuse just about anything if we're given the opportunity. So the last question, we're going to wrap it up. And this is more of an addiction question, but can you talk a little bit about the spectrum of addiction? This is my first time hearing this. Can you say more? One of my favorite topics, right? About this kind of continuum of behavioral health disorders, whether it's alcohol or drug addiction or love addiction or anything. So talk a little bit about the spectrum. I think it's a great way to end.
Yeah. So, you know, within the World Health Organization, they reclassified, I think it was in the 1990s, addiction to be a spectrum disorder. So rather than it being you either are or you aren't, it's you are somewhere on that scale, depending on the usage, depending on how many years it's been going on, depending on the impact on your life. And again, this is this nuanced question. It's not really about sticking a label on you and saying you are this. It's about saying, well, how is it impacting on your life and how do you feel about it? And, you know, so with everything, because it's not just about a substance. We know that now. It could be your phone, it could be, you know, pornography, it could be relationships, but it's about the impact on your life and how detrimental that is. And so the World Health Organization puts it on a scale, starting with I always get it, it's the wrong way around, hazardous, and then harmful, and then dependency. And what we find, certainly, you know, if you within the drinking conversation and mummy wine culture, and, you know, the kind of what we're starting to talk about, the grey area of drinking, is when it's that line between you know, hazardous, harmful behavior, and then dependency that would need detox medically. And a lot of people are playing on that line, which is incredibly dangerous, but it's also completely socially acceptable. And that's certainly where Kate and I were, you know. So I hope that helped a little bit.
I think it was wonderful, wonderful. And on that note, here we are, 10:08. We went over, and we could probably continue on for quite a long time. But I have my elderly dad visiting me, and I have to go make sure that he's got his coffee and his breakfast. So
wonderful.
Kids.
And me too. Yes, you've got kids. So thank you so much, Mandy and Kate. It's always a delight to spend time with either one of you individually. Kind of a double bonus to have both of you at the same time, and to bring such wealth of information to our community. I know from all of the engagement, and if you go on our Facebook page, that you have many opportunities to re-engage with people there as well. So I really want to thank you. We know we're getting lots of information, lots of compliments. Thank you, great presentation. Everybody's saying how important this was. And so I just thank you for taking your time this evening. And I can't wait to hold you both and give you a big hug in person, hopefully next April as she recovers in Miami.